a lot of us are her friends, and we're just so excited that finally she'll be able to not just help us with our dating life, but help people, and hopefully that we'll be able to know more about her and all her family too. So Katie is a holistic nurse from Boston. She moved to New York City and had a year of singlehood, and she meets a good guy and then follows with the question, is he the one? Katie will be sharing about the apprehensions singles face during the period of dating and how they can turn it into a time of separation instead. She's happily married to the man of her dreams, he's way Tanto, and she lives in New York City. Let's give a big round of applause to Katie.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, fine. So, hi everyone, my name is Katie, and this is my husband, Tanto. And first off, I just want to first be sensitive to the way I speak. I'm working on this, but sometimes I can talk in kind of a demandy way, but just know that's more of an encouragement and not me saying, you have to do this. And I'm a verbal processor, and so as I speak, there might be kind of this go around, and you're going to kind of enter into the complicatedness of my brain while I was dating. So if you're complicated, if it sounds really complicated, hopefully it wraps back around, and then we'll go over how to simplify everything. So yeah, I made dating so complicated, despite praying and working on myself and speaking with the spiritual director, adoration, sacraments. This is kind of my reflection and processing of the resources I found through Metanoia Catholic, Dr. Bob Schutz, some of the lives of the saints, and some other, my holistic nursing background, which is finding the root cause in illnesses. And so I kind of took that into my dating life a little bit. So we'll start the talk. So how many of you have heard, from the moment I walked in the room, I knew I would marry that person? Raise your hand if you heard that. Or if you heard, when you know, you know. All these things, right? I did not experience those things. I did not know when you know. And so when I was dating Tanto, I was like, something must be wrong with me, because I'm hearing all these talks. I met at 6 months and then we got married, or and they walked in and I saw them there and they had this curly hair, with a pink shirt, and it's like, okay, well, so God really does want to fulfill our desires, but sometimes they have to be purified first. So we might be asking for a 6'8" guy with blue eyes, the 800 credit score, male model, professional athlete, artistic connoisseur, conversationalist, talks to me like a female friend would, understands all of my needs before I know them, there's no awkward moments, has all my interests, is just excited about every single topic that I am, understands all my jokes from day one, and who responds perfectly in every situation. Goes to, they're the same, doing all the same stuff I'm doing spiritually. But then it's like, wait, do I want to marry myself? No, I want to marry someone else, right? Sometimes we think these things, and it's stuff that, it's we want to marry someone like ourselves sometimes, but that's not really who God doesn't want us to just stay in our own kind of selves. He wants us to come out of ourselves. So what about asking God for an emotional available man or a family man? And I'm talking mostly to the females, but I think hopefully the men can this can work for them too. God sent me a man and he didn't have the right outfit, so I freaked out. And maybe God sent you a woman, people could be sitting in the room, who was older than you, and you're like, yeah, sorry, I can't do that. Or maybe God sent you a man that's right around your periphery, who's shorter than you, and you're like, yeah, I can't do that, sorry. Or maybe the woman near you makes more than you, and you're like, no, I need to be the provider, and that's a real need of men. But or maybe the man, maybe on the first date, the man's like, I want a stay-at-home wife, and it's like, these questions should be discussed later when you know each other. So what are we attached to? I was so attached to this fantasy person, like a Clark Kent Jesus, like feeding my every need, like supposed to, all these expectations. We have to be taking care, just because of like whatever it is, like we're hurt, or we were the ones taking care of people, and so we think that they should do the same, or we're just watching too many rom-coms, and we think it's going to happen like that. And when we were dating, I would be sending Tonto like all these podcasts on relationships and like dissecting everything to the point of indulgence in order to safety-proof insurance our marriage, like the dating marriage down the line, so I could know with absolute 150% certainty that we were meant to be together. And this, was how I was treating Tonto. I was treating these preferences as if they were needs and expected Tonto to fill all the needs. But only God can do this. He's the only one that can do this, fill all our needs. So with Tonto, I had all these things that were unwritten, silent expectations, that a boyfriend or a fiance should do, and it was from the floor to the sky of if he didn't do it, for me it was the anxiety would kick in. It's a red flag. Maybe we should break up, and it was this constant hot and cold. Father Rippinger, an Exodus priest, says the enemy is really getting into our emotions nowadays and breaking up marriages. And I think he's trying to prevent marriages from even happening in the first place by making things so complicated, because our emotions, our passions we feel in our body based on thoughts that are true or not true. So sometimes our emotions, they're based on thoughts, and it might not even be a true thought, and we're freaking out. And I'll go in more into this later. And this is where the enemy is tricking us. So we need to be equipped with the spiritual intelligence and self-control of our mind in order to fight the battle that is in front of us today. And this is just from Matthew 20. The one who received the seed that fell on rocky places is the man who hears the word and once receives it with joy. But since he has no root, he lasts only a short time. And when trouble or persecution comes because of the word, he quickly falls away. The one who receives the seed that fell among the thorns is the man who hears the word, but the worries of this life and deceitfulness of wealth choke it, making it unfruitful. But the one who received the seed that fell on good soil is the man who hears the word and understands it. He produces crop, yielding 160, 30 times that was sown. So I was in that first part where something would happen and I would have this freak out, just be so concerned about the worries that I couldn't be in the present moment. So how many of you guys are afraid to get married? You can raise your hand. You don't have to if you don't want to admit it. But yeah, how many of you are afraid to get married? I was so flippin' scared, literally out of my mind, to the point where I was making myself sick. I made myself physically ill. And my mom died, so that ended the marriage with my dad. And then my brother's wife left with their 2 kids out of the blue. And that marriage ended. My brother was fighting for it, and stayed true to his vows the whole time, but it ended. Everywhere around us, marriages are breaking up, or we just see marriages kind of status quo, living as roommates. And so I was afraid of marrying the wrong person. I will tell you, Tonto was not what I imagined. Completely different than the chick flick scene I saw in my head, with the back and forth, flirty banter, fighting, but hard to get type of stuff. What are you guys afraid of? Are you afraid he or she won't fulfill every need? They won't. Are you afraid they won't be perfect? They won't. Are you afraid yourself won't be perfect? You won't. If God had given me someone who filled every need, I wouldn't have grown to love him and grow in the areas God wanted to heal me in. I was so afraid of marrying the wrong person, and I wanted to know, as I said earlier, with absolute clarity, that Tonto was the one. I believe, like nowadays, there's sort of this, in the Catholic scene, this kind of idolatry of marriage and it being perfect. And, like I said, fulfilling every need, anticipating the thoughts to the point of reading each other's minds. The other person almost, like, we're almost expecting them to treat us as a god. And it's like, we're just human. This is a lie of the enemy. I believe God created marriage between one man and one woman because we do scientifically have different brains, and we need God. And if our relationship was perfect, we wouldn't need God. So, Tonto came in a steady manner. There was nothing dramatic about it, except all the drama and unnecessary turmoil that I created. But he wasn't even shocked by that. He was just very steady. And it was the complete opposite of how I imagined things to happen, and the person I thought at the time that God had in mind. I was expecting like the long time in the street and like a magnet like being pulled like towards the person, right? Like, I know it sounds crazy, but I think people think that like, on the third date, I should know that he's the one or she's the one. And like, we didn't have chemistry. And like this out-of-body experience, and like God saying like, they are the one you're supposed to marry. And there's like this 24 laughing, non-stop, constant, tense, deep conversations. He would do everything on my list, all my silent, untold expectations. But love is given freely. It's not manipulation or control. And I think this anxiety sometimes comes because we're trying to control. And the anxiety does not mean we aren't doing what God wants us to do. But because God doesn't speak in anxiety. Maybe the anxiety is just, we just need to look at it. So during this time, and I'll go more into like how I met Tonto, but I was just starting to learn, like, I was hot and cold. I was hot and cold with Tonto, and it was kind of confusing for him. And I learned to make, Mother Claire from Samuel Group, I don't know if you guys know her, but she's from the CFRs. She said the sermon has 3 types. 1, God tells you directly. The thing is, this is very few people, but these are all the stories that we hear. The saints, our parents, like, this is like, I don't know why, but it's the only stories we hear is like, the ones that's like, God tells me directly. And then 2 is, some people gather scattered consolations, like they're picking up flowers here and there, and they fill a bouquet, and then they know their vocation. And the 3rd one is others simply, because of their state in life, their family, their circumstances, they choose marriage. This is the majority, and by default, our vocation is usually marriage. And this is why you see, not in the Catholic scene, but just even secular people getting married. And they just decide. So when I moved to New York, it was like a rejection from a guy, and I was like, that's it, I'm being single, I'm being single, So I decided, I did have like a decided, I'm gonna be single. And it was a good year. I dressed how I wanted to dress, not to like impress a guy. I went to events I wanted to go to, not because I thought I might meet a guy. And so God used that year to get close to him. And there was one point I was trying to meet female friends during this time to really just grow in that sisterhood. And it was an Edith Stein book club, and she writes it's based off, JP2 writes his Letter to Woman based on Edith Stein's writings. And I left that book club, and all of a sudden, there was like an openness. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm not gonna do the single thing anymore. Like, it just all of a sudden kind of changed. So then I started going to some activities, Catholic activities, a friend of mine had said, don't go to all the activities, just sprinkle, in the beginning of the seasons, and pick one thing that you can do consistently, but don't treat it like your social life, like just sprinkle in activities and then do one consistent thing that you can grow in your faith, or whatever it was. So I chose personal projects as my 1 month per month thing. And this is where I met one of Tanto's female friends, and we had lived in the same neighborhood. And after months of trying to kind of get together, she was a planner, I was a last minute organizer. She invited me last minute on a hike, and that Tanto planned, and I could do it. So after that, I didn't really think anything of Tanto on the hike, honestly. It wasn't love at first sight. So just putting that out there. Like, I didn't really notice Tanto. But my focus was elsewhere because I was so focused on the, all-American type of, like, not necessarily, like, just the, does every, I don't know how to explain it. But I was so focused on the Clark Kent Jesus. That's what I would say. And it didn't matter which culture. I loved all the cultures, dated all the cultures. So it wasn't something like that. But, that's what I was focused on, so I didn't notice Tanto at the time. So then she started organizing, COVID hit, and she started organizing game nights with just a few friends, 6 people, and I was like the new girl who didn't really know anyone. And then at one of the game nights, Tanto shaved his face, and I saw his dimples, and was like, oh, I think he's kind of cute. And then I told him, at one point we were talking, and I was like, I have an idea, and so he tried to get coffee a couple times. I wasn't getting the hint, again, because he just was not on my radar. I was out just living my life. And then, finally one time he called me at a friend's engagement party, and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting, he's at the engagement party, he called me? But I was just like, whatever. And then a couple more, game nights, Valentine's Day murder party, I invited him to. And then at one point he got me to go on a walk before friends get together, my friend Stephanie. And we, after we went out to a concert, and I had this guy friend, it was one of those weird one-on-one guy friend things. And so we got into the concert free, he sat us at the table, and then he was coming over to me. And so then Tanto's kind of I don't know if I should, he asked his friend, I found this out later, ask her out again. He was like, no, just keep asking her out. So then, basically after that, Tanto asked me out for tea, and then after that, he asked me out on an intentional date. So he did 2 getting to know me's, and then after that, he was very intentional with, will you go on a date with me? So there was none of this monthly long, yearly long, one-on-one hangouts with male or female, with the opposite sex friends, where you're emotionally attached, and other people don't know what to do because they're like, well, something's going on, and they have a connection, but nothing happens between them, and then you're not actually open because you're so attached to that other person, you don't realize it until you kind of create some space, and then the next thing you know, one of the other ones is dating, right? So, long story short, I think it was a matter of 12 days, and I had seen Tanto 9 times in that 12 days. And I remember telling one of my friends, and I kept saying, he did this amazing thing, he did that amazing thing, and he was intriguing, he kept surprising me every time. And I kind of judged him as this plain Catholic guy, and he had all these amazing, interesting parts to him, and 10 million lives, and I was tell my friends, and they're like, wow, I wouldn't have expected that, yeah, I wouldn't, and I was like, I know. And then I realized we were made for each other, got married, and happily ever after. No, I'm just kidding. So this is where it starts. So 9 dates in 12 days, I started to realize that's a lot. I was Tanto was going away for the weekend, and I could tell things were going faster, and I wasn't quite there yet. So the day before he left, he asked me to see me that morning before he left, taking off. And I told him, just to test him, I was I'm gonna go to mass at 8 a.m. in the morning. And didn't think he would come. I wouldn't think he would come, you know. And then he said he would. I was like, oh, okay. So I show up late, and Santo's there waiting for me outside the church in baggy khakis and a humongous cross around his neck. And now I'm just there walking up, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. I'm like getting anxiety seeing him with those like baggy khakis and big shirt and a huge cross. I know it's super vain, but I was just like, I don't know if I can do this. Like I was just like, I don't know if I can do this. So I was getting this anxiety, right? So now I think it was super cute when I think back on it. And I'm like, that's just so cute. It was so cute. So after Mass, we're in front of the St. Joseph statue, and you guys probably know what's coming. I realized he probably learned it in the men's groups, and he just blurted out, "Will you be my girlfriend?" And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't, again, I'm like, I can't take how sweet this is. I told him I was like, can we talk outside? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not emotionally there yet. And the feelings were awful. We both looked terrible. My brain was so flat, I looked miserable. And then I'm like, oh, did you still want to go get to that hot chocolate place? And Tom's like, yeah, no. So I was just like, what do I do? I'm freaking out. He drops me off. I asked one of my friends, and she was like, well, do you still want to see him? And I'm like, yes, but I'm not sure yet. Like, and she's like, but so you got to text him. And so I texted him and I said, look, I'm not emotionally there yet, but I still want to see you. So he went away for the weekend, and I hang out with some of my other girlfriends, and they're like, look, this guy, Tonto, he's a real man. Like, he's a real man. And so I went out with some other guys that weekend, and then we saw each other on, this is how, like, avoidant I was. I just went out and, like, we had this thing, right? And then I'm, like, freaking out, go out with other guys on the weekend, and then Monday we see each other. And my fear, I wanted to just end things. I'm like, all right, that's it. You know, we'll just end it right here before it goes anywhere. But there was something that kept me going, and whenever I was freaking out, Tonto was always there with this calm. Would create temporary calm. And I told him, as long as you're okay with me not being sure yet, I still want to date you. And we weren't official at this point, as I said no to the girlfriend thing. And so he said, okay, that's fine. Did you eat yet? And my heart was just at rest. It was like, well, wow, it was that. Here I am thinking, like, that's it, I'm going to end it. And now he's saying, okay, that's fine. Did you eat yet? You know, like, that's great. So relief. As time went on, I was hot and cold. Tonto really didn't know how to read me. I would like say certain things to friends, and then who maybe didn't really know me, and they would be like, it doesn't sound like you really like him that much. And then at that point, I decided to be extremely sensitive and selective as to who I share my information with. And I'm really glad I did, because if many people were in the back and forth of my mind and heart, I think I had to work through like this stuff myself with God, and eventually with the mindset coach. It would have caused just so much drama, like in the Catholic scene, or like, I mean, I wasn't really like too like doing everything, but it just would have caused me already more confusion in my already tangled mind. So a friend of mine, we had similar mindsets and want to grow, a nurse coach friend of mine, she just one day was like, do you think you could be like, have you ever heard of the avoidant attachment style? I'm like, no, I never heard of it. So I looked into it, and basically it was this idea that every time you were getting close, you would kind of self-sabotage yourself. And so the closer you got, then I would just, be critical of Tonto, or, do these things that were kind of like, so that he would break up with me, basically. And then I would go out with other guys and stuff, which again, we weren't official, so that's fine. And the other thing to note is this wasn't a Catholic friend. So like, God speaks through everybody, right? So it doesn't have to just be Catholic things. And the point where, and then I would start asking myself, do I really not like Tonto, or am I just being avoidant? And then the answer was, you're being avoidant. It would just come. The answer would just come. But then I would think, anyways, basically every time the relationship progressed, I would get this anxiety, and basically throughout the whole time. At one point, 7 months in, I was making myself so ill with the question, is he the one? We went skiing and tried to try snowboarding. It was icy, so he ended up getting concussions. So I'm like, I grew up skiing and he didn't. So it's normal that he wasn't used to the skiing thing. But in my head, I'm like, that was another thing. It was a red flag. He can't ski. Like, oh my gosh, freaking out, that he can't ski. And it's Valentine's Day. I look sick. And I told Tonto I wasn't sure about things. I was praying holy hours, I was just doing all these things. And I just remember walking across, we got back from it was just a day, skiing. And I remember walking across the street I'm like this, walking across the street, almost falling over. And I go to adoration, and I have to leave because I'm so, can't do anything. And I was in the health nut store on 63rd, I don't know if you guys know it. And I called Tonto, and I'm asking, Tonto, do you think we should break up? And I think at that point he thought that I was breaking up with him. So he just said, well, if we break up, I'm not going to wait for you. So then I'm like, no, I'm not saying I broke up. I'm saying, do you think we should break up? And so then later on, my brother was part of a prophecy prayer group. And he was come to the group, so I invited Tonto. And of course, on the prayer group, they said, oh, well, who's this other guy? We know that you're John's sister. Who's this other guy? And I said, my boyfriend. But Tonto heard, because I missed the point where eventually we did become boyfriend-girlfriend after another 3 months. So we were official at this point after 3 months of dating, and then we became official boyfriend-girlfriend. So 7 months, this is when it is. And so I said, it's my boyfriend, but Tonto only heard friend. So he logs off immediately, and is that was real low, and I don't know what he said, but he was very hurt, of course, because he thought I said friend. And then I got prayed over in the session, and there was a release of some sort from the enemy. There was just this how it felt basically with this is I couldn't, my brain I felt was blocked, and I just felt I couldn't, I had this kind of stronghold on me that I couldn't get rid of. I would be, I said, in adoration, confession, I just couldn't get rid of it. And then I got prayed over, and there was just a release. And later that week, I met with Tonto to explain that the enemy was really getting to me, and I just didn't know how to handle it, and why I was putting him through the ringer, and basically with my behaviors and the emotional roller coaster. However, I didn't really know what to make of it. I didn't know what to, I knew that, but I didn't know what to do. So a friend had recommended the Men in the Way of Catholic podcast, and I tried it a couple times. I was this couple's too perfect, and whatever. So then but randomly that week, after the prayer release, one of the podcasts pops up. And it was this coach talking about her niche, which was relationship anxiety. And I was like, this is me. She's talking about the doubts, and even after marriage, and saying how she thought she married the wrong guy. So I signed up the next day. And there I learned that I am not my thoughts. And that was such a freeing feeling to know I'm not my thoughts. And I learned I didn't have to entertain them. And it was not just this thought exchange and picking new thoughts and forcing myself to believe it. I was getting to the root of the thought and the emotion and the action and all the lies that were built up from wounds and rejection and fears. And I just, before I knew this, I just kept feeding the lies. And a lot of them, I'm going to go over some of them, they weren't a lot of them were they kind of are neutral, right? They weren't these obvious ones necessarily. And the enemy will continue to plant bad seeds and feed the lies. Feed the lies. And so, basically, I'm going to go into kind of like a little bit of this. Basically, God has a plan for our life, and so does the enemy. And so this, once I go into it, which will kind of like hopefully decomplicate things, I don't want you to think we're going to be thinking about the enemy all the time. It's actually like you end up thinking about him less by becoming aware and just kind of punching him out of the way. So, my mom used to say, the enemy has 99 truths and 1 deception. And it's just so true. And we have to become attuned to these deceptions. Some think we are focusing on the enemy too much. That's what I do. But once we start this process, we realize that we'll not do that. The one that he is trying to cause damage in your relationship with God and others in nature. So he's trying to cause damage in those areas. The less time we spend ruminating on these thoughts. Anyways, I look back on my life and how I was so paralyzed by decisions, and I would go back and forth and regret and imagine all the possibilities, and until I was so confused, I would always delay to like the last second, literally the last second, to make a decision most of the time. Like not just in dating, but just like in everything like important or that needed to be made a decision. And the enemy speaks in confusion. So that is that makes sense. And so I want us to be able to move from passivity of just believing any thought that comes our way and taking it and getting all riled up, because that's what the enemy wants us to get like so engulfed in this tornado in our minds that we don't live our vocation in that moment, whatever our vocation is in that moment, like right now. And he wants us to take reign of our thoughts. And it's interesting because like the enemy God is so specific and tailored to us, and it's so unique how he speaks to each one of us. And that's something that's really kind of, if you are single and even married or dating, just kind of like learning how God speaks to you. And we'll go over like how he speaks, like the voices and stuff. But in terms of like, is it through images or words or nature or exercise, like learning those kind of things. And so that, but there was a story once we were engaged and I wanted to go buy frozen broccoli. This is how like, it's kind of crazy how, I'm just saying this kind of funny example. I wanted to buy frozen broccoli. And there was a lot of spiritual attack at the time of like the wedding, and I went to Trader Joe's and literally everything was packed to the brim of the frozen section, except both organic and regular broccoli were completely empty. And it's like, I was like, oh, this is just so funny. I'll just get asparagus. And like, it's not that big of a deal. But before, it's kind of like, I'm using that kind of smaller example, but we can kind of do that with bigger things, and of how the enemy just wants us to get wild up, like, oh, you don't have the broccoli, so like now, whatever it is, right? So I think Clarissa has the paper with the voices of the enemy, so I'm going to kind of go into that a little bit, because I have this from this book, Uniformity with God's Will. And what we do a lot of times is we get some sort of trial or whatever it is, wherever we are in life, and this is the quote. But you say you would gladly endure desolation if you were certain that it comes from God. But you are tortured by anxiety that your desolation comes by your own fault and is a punishment for your tepidity. Very well, let us suppose you are right. Then get rid of your tepidity and exercise more diligence in the fears of your soul. But because you are possibly experiencing spiritual darkness, are you going to get all wrought up, give up prayer, and thus make things twice as bad as they already are? So it's like you're in traffic, you can't control it, right? You can't go forward, like you just have to kind of be in the traffic. You could start smashing all the cars, right, and trying to get through. That's what we do sometimes with this stuff. So we're kind of gonna talk about, so the voice of the enemy, I think she's showing it. So basically, when you're not living the 10 Commandments in the Catechism, the enemy will trick you with peace. So, like, it'll make you think that, some sin is the right thing to do, and he'll give you kind of peace with that to trick you, to get you away from what God really wants. But when there's these more neutral thoughts, the enemy will speak in the red category. So I don't know. I find this very helpful to, like, if I had kind of known this before, I would have saved myself a lot of emotional turmoil. So now I know, okay, if I get a fear, okay, that's not from the enemy. But we don't want to just white knuckle and repress the thought, right? Because that's what I feel like our parents' generation did. Like, they just kind of like repress the thought and like, I'm just going to keep going and be reliant. Like, you have the electric bike and you're pedaling harder on the electric bike, and it's like the grace is there. The electric bike is there. Like, use the grace, right? So this could cause us. So I'm going to just keep going, and then I'm going to kind of do a little skit, if that helps. So I want to do an example of how you can use this God's voice versus the enemy's voice, right? Like, say you get a lustful thought, right? I feel like we might be like, I shouldn't get that thought, and you're like, you want to confession, and those are all good things. Maybe you renounce the thought, and Jesus said, I renounce lust and I renounce purity. Those are good things too. But God's allowing it for some reason to purify something. So maybe it's just a random temptation, but you can ask yourself, instead of getting all wound up, I'm not holy enough, or I'm not healed yet because this thought still came up, it's just an old thought pattern that maybe you were used to believing, right? And so we just say, why? Why are you getting that thought? And the answer does come. So as a holistic nurse, I believe that the breathing is very important. So breathing in, so what happens is the devil's voice a lot of times causes us to go in this unnecessary emotional turmoil, the fight, or flee. So we want to fight, we want to flee, get out of the situation. So like every time something wasn't perfect with me and Tonto, I would be like, that's it, I think I should break up. Or we freeze, and we can't make any decision. And so, but this was for our survival instincts back in the day. So like, if you notice, when you get into fight or flight, your heart starts beating faster, you start breathing heavy through your mouth, and we look for danger. And if there's no life or death danger, then we just can't think. Like, you can think about this at work. If someone says something triggering, and then like for the rest of the day you can't work, you can't get your work done, right? The enemy wants that, so you can't be successful, right? So how we can do this is, and it feels like a real danger because we can feel it in our bodies, but it's really like a perceived danger. So we can go into this many times during the day. We can be in a constant state of panic, and if you're in a constant panic, you get chronic illness, you get disease, all these things. So how can we like interject it so that like, okay, Tonto shows up with the baggy pants and the big cross, and I'm like, going to fight or flight, right? So instead, I can start breathing in and out through my nose with my mouth shut for at least a minute, because that puts you into a parasympathetic state, which is like how God speaks to us, is the blue zone. And then you can maybe say like a little aspiration, like, come Holy Spirit, or into your hands I commit my spirit, or whatever your favorite saying, whoever your favorite saying is, or your guardian angel, or an image that calms you, and then just ask yourself, why? Why am I feeling anxious? Why am I thinking this thought? And when you're in a parasympathetic state, your subconscious brain, the thoughts, will come to the front. So that's why that works. And then if there's sin, you can renounce it and thank God for revealing this. And then maybe that's it for someone. But maybe you need more, like a coach, like I did, or the internal family systems parts work is super helpful, or a therapist, or maybe you need a journal, pray, read God's word. So that's how that can kind of be like helpful. That doesn't really scratch the surface. It just kind of scratches the surface. But at least then you can kind of start to recognize. Like now I start to recognize, like say Tonto said something and I got hurt by that. Like, and I have a thought, right? And the thought's not good. It's not helpful. I shouldn't say to Tonto. And so I just say, wait a minute, I'm in fight or flight right now. And I do the breathing. And then say, why are you having this thought? And then the answer comes up. I was hurt. I got hurt by what he said. Now I can go back to Tonto and I can go in a more calm way and I can tell him what I got hurt from. Right? As opposed to, like, there's a misconception with dating and marriage. I need to tell them everything. They need to know everything. Well, you're being more truthful in like the parasympathetic state because you're not in fight or flight. You're not in this like danger zone. Like, because right, if I said what I said and then I start being critical, oh, you never do this, you always do this, whatever it is, right? I'm being super critical, I'm name calling him, I'm blaming him for something that he didn't even do or know that he did, right? As opposed to if I go back after this realization, oh, I was hurt by that. And so, so that's just another example. So, I have a lot of papers here, so I'm gonna try to, So anyway, at one point I'm gonna go and kind of explain some more examples. I don't know if that would be helpful for people. Yes or no? Okay. So, at one point I was on a healing retreat and, I was sort of miserable. Everybody around me is getting this consolation. They're crying, they're happy, they're laughing. Like, people are telling these like amazing stories of like conversion. I'm just like, yeah, whatever, like not that big of a deal. You know, like kind of just not being moved by anything. And the first night they had some praise and worship. It was a Dr. Bob Schuchts healing, JP2 Healing Center retreat. And they had something, and the host was singing and was like, yeah, and we praise God, and what is it that you need to let go of? And what came to me was Tonto. I need to let go of Tonto. So of course the enemy wanted me to think the relationship. So I'm freaking out the whole retreat, like just sort of going crazy. But what God wanted me to learn from that was to not let go of Tonto's, like in the relationship, but to let go of my control of Tonto and trying to put Tonto into this box of what I wanted him to be because of the image that I had him to be in the fantasy person, Clark Kent, Jesus, perfect situation thing, right? So on that trip, I was starting like a year before starting to read the Bible, like start to finish, like a little passage on the beginning, and then a psalm. So I would go back and I would read the Psalms, and every time I just got peace. And I was still having this anxiety thing going on. But then I would start picking like aspirations from the Bible, and this was super helpful. Into your hands I commit my spirit, the shepherd one. And the gospel is alive, it's God's word, and this really made things more real, because it is real, and it's present now. So yeah, God knows and he allows all this, and we can't really, like with dating, I'm going to give some tips, I'll wait for that, but if we think of like, how we can change, like any change, we get resistance. So even me trying to get up, without the snooze button, say I said I'm going to get up, and I'm going to get up on the first alarm, I'm not going to hit snooze. The day before I'm all gung-ho, I'm ready to go. The next morning comes, the alarm goes off, and it's like, snooze. So your body is just like, okay, you're not used to this. We're not going to do that thing, right? You get this resistance, and you have to push through. And so, and I don't know if you guys seen Inside Out 2, but if you've seen it, it's really good because it kind of explains a lot of this. And when we believe a thought over and over again, it becomes a belief. And it goes down to the belief system. Like they go down the elevator in the Inside Out 2 and they put it down the belief system. And it gets rooted there. And those can be subconscious or conscious, right? And we could just be feeling a certain way when something happens and then we act a certain way. And we make certain actions based on those beliefs that, again, may or may not be true. And so again, we don't want to white knuckle and try to repress these bad thoughts, but we just really want to get curious about them. And again, the reason I say the last one, because it's a good example of you don't want to like get curious about the image that's being like kind of presented, but you just want to get curious about why you're having it and why God's allowing it. So other beliefs that I believed when I came out in coaching that I didn't even know I believed. Let's see, what were they? I can't marry my first boyfriend. That was a big one because I was like, I had dated a lot of other guys, but it never got to the point of boyfriend, girlfriend. So I thought, I don't have enough experience, and then the dad would be like, yeah, you should have like slept around, and you should have like, all these crazy thoughts, right? Like convincing me that I should have like been sleeping around, which like obviously is, against the Ten Commandments, so like that's not from God. So that was kind of like an obvious one, but like why was I having it? Doubting is bad. I didn't think that you could doubt, and like doubting is normal with every stage of the relationship. Even after you get married, some people, especially if they haven't done some of the mindset work, they can doubt after. And to know like, okay, that's normal, it's part of the process, it's not a crisis. Why am I having this thought? Well, maybe that person isn't doing what you wanted them to do, right? And it's something that God wants to grow in you. So it's not always bad to be doubting. Someone said once, and they didn't really even know me, they're like, yeah, you guys are both extroverts. Like, I've never really seen that. Okay, I'm like freaking out, but it doesn't matter. Like, you can marry someone similar to you, you can marry someone opposite than you. Like we believe marriage is between a man and a woman. Like, that's opposite enough. Like, you don't need to be like, oh no, I need someone completely opposite, or I need someone completely the same. Like, God is in control. I had another lie about wounds come out in marriage, not dating. So I thought love should just be kind of like given on a platter, and like, it should be easy, like, it shouldn't be this difficult, And I was writing poems about Tonto, but I was also convincing myself I didn't like him. So like, I would go back and I would read these poems, I'm like, wow, I must really like this guy. But then like, the way I was acting was like completely opposite from the poems, and I would sometimes do this thing where I would pray for something, but then I would be like, but God, but whatever you think is best. Because I didn't actually believe it would actually happen. So that was something I would just be praying and be like, yeah, but whatever you think is best. Because it was kind of like, it was like a cop-out. Like, yeah, I don't think it will actually happen. I thought I was too ugly to get married. I thought I was too sick to get married. I thought I should have been married at 25. I would complain we didn't have connection. This is a big one, I think, between like females and males. Like, women have like, I think it's 3 times as much words that they need to speak as men, right? And this is a generalization, of course. And so, yeah, it's really important to have female friends so that you can get your words out. And your man doesn't have to listen to like everything, and he can have some space too, as well. So, about that, I would ask him deep questions and put him on the spot, which he didn't like being put on the spot. And then he wouldn't really have the best answers, so I'd be like criticizing him and say, oh, we don't have a deep connection, and then this would cause him not to speak, because then I criticized him for his answer not being deep enough, or whatever it was, not being the best answer. So then he stopped talking for a little bit, and then I had to practice not criticizing, and then he did open up again a little. He did open up again, and I would even convince myself I wasn't attracted to him. But Liz was looking at me so cute, I can't take it. But I would just be like thinking, I would just convince myself of it, right? And I would think I wasn't enough. I would think Tonto's not enough. I would think I needed to share every thought, like I said, before it was reasoned through yet. Like Adam and Eve, they had reasoned through emotions. So when they made this, that's why it was so bad in the Garden of Eden when God said, like, you guys are banished. Because they knew what they were doing in that moment, right? Like, sometimes we do something and we don't know exactly. So sometimes it's good to just pause and wait till we've reasoned through something. And then, what else? I had a lot of wounds about my femininity. That was a major one. And what else did I have? Yeah, I kind of just we kind of abuse ourselves sometimes with these thoughts, and we go into a black hole of this oblivion, like this just endless cycle of oblivion. And God gave us free will, right? Like He presents something to us, and we have the free will to choose it or not. Now we don't want to go the other extreme, where then we become self-reliant or like forcing it to happen and, beyond, and it's like, okay, well, that's not good either, right? But, yeah, I think that one about the enemy, that's kind of like a simple trick, that using that voices of the enemy versus voices of God. It's just a simple trick to kind of like get started on like how I can become more aware and how I can become less reactive and more engaged and like make decisions in my mind without letting things just kind of happen to me. So that deep breathing thing is really, really helpful. And everyone talks about gratitude these days, but it does really change our perspective, and we can start to see things we haven't seen before. At the time, I had asked Our Lady of Sorrows to reveal my worst sin. And all of a sudden I opened this book, and it was like it was a marriage book, and it was not very good, the whole book, except for this part, where I opened the book and tried very calmly a list of all of these things that were prideful. And I had no idea. I didn't know that those things were pride. And that's how God presents our sin. He doesn't shame us. He doesn't give these voices that the enemy gives in the red. He doesn't do any of those, even with sin. And even with sin, sometimes He lets us go there in order that we can learn something, or He allows it. There was a period of when we were engaged, and for the most part, and this has happened to a lot of engaged couples where they end up being away a lot during their engagement, but it's kind of like God, I feel like, protecting the engaged couple with their purity. And so Tanta was working a lot. We both had sick family members. I was with them, and so Tanta got a lot of jobs away, and whenever I was alone at the apartment, I had a roommate at the time, and when she was out of town, my family was always ended up being there. It just happened to be this way. But there were two nights in particular, and I remember my roommate had to leave like randomly last minute, and me and Tanya got in these fights, like at the door, and I was like, "That's it," we like shut the door, and he left, and of course we apologized later. And then it happened again, another random time when my roommate last minute had to leave, and I was by myself at the apartment. And both times we got in these fights, and then later I realized, oh, okay, yeah, like God allowed that to like protect us in that moment, just to prevent anything from happening. And then, needless to say, I think there's this kind of thing with self-control. People will say, well, I have self-control, we're not animals. It's not about that. It's about being prudent. Like, it's like, okay, when I first got to know someone, Tanta, I had a studio, and he would come over to the studio, right? But then it started getting risky. But when I started getting to know him, I was like, yeah, this is good. I need to get a roommate, because this is like it's getting risky, right? And so it's not like it's going to happen on the first time, but once you get comfortable with someone, maybe it happens on the 21st time, right? And so just putting those guardrails in and being looking at every situation, I was very intentional of like not allowing the sleepovers. This is something that like it just complicates things. Like you can see how already complicated I was. Imagine if like he was sleeping over. Like that would be crazy. Like I would just be like insane, even more insane than I was. So that just like decomplicates things. And the same thing with trips, like you're gonna go on a honeymoon, you're gonna live, once you meet like someone, you get married, it's almost as if time, like I'm 35, but I don't feel like I was waiting my entire life to be married. Like it's almost like this interesting kind of thing happens with time where you almost felt like you were always with this person. And it's kind of interesting, and I think probably God makes it like that, so that like when I was single, before the singlehood year, Like I was so concentrated on the meet someone, I was so worried and trying to control everything. And it's like, I kind of wish that I could have just enjoyed it more, you know, and then been in that place of singlehood and just said, okay, I'm single, I'm going to do what I can to meet someone if that's what God is calling me to, and put myself in those situations. And the other way that this God voice versus enemy voice is helpful is, I'm sure you've met couples where they're dating and then one says, I want to be a priest or I want to be a nun, and then the other person says, oh my gosh, I don't want you to be away from your vocation. If that's what you feel called to, go do that thing, go, let's break up. And they almost like force the other person to break up, you know? And well, we really should be asking them if that happens to you, or like your friends are telling you something about someone they're dating, or just to say, well, why is that reason through yet? Or is this just like a fight or flight thought? Like, are you in fight or flight right now, or did you really pray about this? Are you coming from a place of peace with this, or is this a place of anxiety? At one point, we were engaged, and we got back from Guadalupe, and we went on, it was basically a very short trip, because save the honeymoon for the honeymoon, right? And we were very intentional again with, like, I stayed with a female friend, and Tanto had his own space. So we get back from Guadalupe, and Tanto found this amazing Guadalupe chapel in Queens. And I go to Tanto, I just want to be in adoration all the time. Like, I just want to be praying all the time in adoration. And he's like, I know, like, the trip was amazing, and we're like saying how amazing it was. And of course, on the trip, I had all these expectations for the trip. Like, we need to read this marriage book and that and this. Until Our Lady was just like, she ended up burning. I ended up using the paper to light candles, and it ended up burning all the expectations. And I was like, she's like, just enjoy. Like, stop trying to control, right? So we're in there, and we went to Samuel Group, which is a great thing. But this is why, like, even listening to my story, I don't want you to, like, take specific things about mine and put it on you, because the devil speaks, and God's, like, the voices of the enemy and voices of God, like, those are the same. But the lies that the enemy tells you and versus tells me are going to be very different. And so sometimes you might go and tell a friend, and they're like, yeah, this happened to me, that's weird, you know? And then, you know, we think that it's not normal. But the enemy tricks us, like, so specifically. And I can't even go into some of the stuff because it's too private, but so anyways, this particular time we go in, and there was a testimony about, and a priest was speaking, and he said, this is what he said, I wanted to be in adoration all the time. I literally just said that to Tanto 2 minutes ago. And then this was the next thing he said, that's not normal. I'm in my seat, freaking out. Here I am engaged. It's February, we're supposed to be engaged in November. I'm freaking out. Tanto starts, like, doing this thing with his neck, which I noticed he did every time he got nervous that I was gonna, like, break up or something. And so all of a sudden, so Tanto's in his seat going like this. I'm like bright red. I'm having a panic attack in the seat. We're in the front row. I'm like, everybody's gonna know that, like, I'm not sure, and I'm engaged, and I'm supposed to marry Tanto in October. Like, this is crazy. So have a freak out attack. And then I, of course, I'm distant from Tanto, because now I'm thinking, I didn't tell him yet, though. That was, you know, I still was having these emotional kind of roller coaster things, but I learned not to say things to him until they were reasoned through yet. So I didn't tell him yet, but I think he knew, because it was just so specific, right? And he knew that I was, but he just remained calm, and he didn't freak out. He didn't go say, you know, I noticed this, and make a big deal of it. He just remained calm, right? And so then I went to my coach, and I journaled, and I realized, okay, this thought is causing anxiety. Anxiety is not from God. I was behaving in ways, trying to be critical again, self-sabotaging, like being distant from Tanto. And once I see the actions, because the voices of the enemy, like you end up doing sin, right? You end up doing sin and it causes separation. So like once you kind of start seeing the actions, it almost clicks more, at least for me, like, oh yeah, that thought's not from God. Like even a neutral thought, like, oh, I wish he was taller, right? And then you see that you start being critical, you're like not really being, yourself, like, so it's so particular to everybody. So then I continue to journal, and then one of the parts of the journal that the Metanoia journal has is eventually, what is God's interpretation? And what God said was very clearly, because at this point I was in parasympathetic state, and he said, yeah, you could be a nun, or you could get married. The choice is up to you. But where have you grown? Where are you going to grow more? And in that moment, for me, I knew how much I had grown in that year. I just had seen how I was starting. I was still having, again, these panic things, but I was starting to get more control of my emotions and reasoning through and using these skills to, like, really kind of, like, push away the enemy's, like, tricks. And I was starting to recognize them. And they're always the same for, like, each person. Like, they're always going to just twist it a little different way. So then, immediate peace, right? And so then I go and I tell Tonto, like, you wouldn't believe this happened, right? And he's not shocked at all. So, so I feel like we think the end result is marriage. Oh, that's another lie of the enemy. When I get married, I'm going to be happy, right? Like, or once I get married, I'll be happy. It's like, no, you can be happy now, do things that you love to do now. Like, I'm sure all of you guys like stuff, like events and stuff that aren't Catholic. Like, you don't only have to go to Catholic events to meet your Catholic spouse. Like, treat the Catholic events as like a place where it's like a stepping stone. Pick one thing that you're like, okay, I really want to learn. Maybe it's a Bible study. I really want to like start reading the Bible. Or like during the years of singlehood, like where can you grow that you know of? Like a lot of this stuff I didn't know until I was dating Tonto. But like, get to know your temperament. But get to know how you respond to people. Do I like big parties? Do I like small parties? Do I like, do I need space? Like, do I need like one-on-one time with friends? Or am I okay with just like a small group? Or like, do I need time to rest in between activities? Like, get to know, like, those things. Get to really know God, like, adoration. Because I think, like, New York is so amazing. You guys, like, we live in such a great city, and there's so many free things, so many amazing things. Like, meet someone at that Catholic group, and then go do something with them, like, out in the city, and do something fun. Or, so a friend called me and he's like, I have this guy friend who just moved to the city. Do you know any girl you can introduce him to? And I'm like, yeah. There's a men's group up on West 96th Street. I recommend him go do that first. Meet some men first, and then then send him back to me. I'll introduce him to someone. But so that's the thing. Like, get to know the sisterhood and the brotherhood, because when you get married, you're gonna really need that. Because you're not going to have those one-on-one guy friends. Like, it's great, and they give you attention, it's like fun, but once you start dating someone, like, you can't really talk to them, like, you should be telling your, like, partner that your partner that, or your spouse that. So, like, that whole work husband thing, like, I don't like that thing, it's kind of, I just don't like it, because that's where the enemy can get in there, right? It's like, oh yeah, we're staying late at work. Oh yeah, like, oh, you're here again? Oh, well, now it's about dinner time, Oh, okay, yeah, well, let's go see a movie now, right? Like, the enemy can get in there. So those one-on-one things, I would just say to the person, I'm really being intentional with who I spend one-on-one time with, and that's it. If they don't want to pursue, then it's clear, right? Like, someone told me that early on. We were asking all friends for advice, and she said that. So I kind of gave it a cutoff. Like, I would do like a month. That was my cutoff for these one-on-one things. And sometimes, we like the attention. Like, I love the chase, of like going on these dates, right? The online's fine. Like, don't have these rigid rules about dating. There's really no rules, right? It's like, except for trying to follow the commandments and get close to God and the catechism and stuff like that. But not even, it shouldn't be shoulds, right? So, what did I just say? I just lost my train of thought. So we think, what can we do differently? I remember asking this question to some of my guy friends. I would say, what can I do differently? And they would say, nothing, you're great, don't change. When you least expect it, it will happen. And so, what does that do? That just leaves me in the same place of doing the same thing that I was always doing, right? So, I want to be sensitive with this because I know some people, they might struggle with feeling like they take the blame for everything, and that's not from God either, right? I think the main point from this is just to know that the devil speaks in extremes, right? So if we're doing anything extreme, it's like, try to get back to balance. And I'm not saying when we want to change that we have to change our innate personality, but our perspective. And God wants to heal us. He wants to give us a resurrection. He wants us, He doesn't want us to just be single and worried about our vocation. You're exactly where you're supposed to be right now. And how can I come and know and accept God's will then? And we do need to change to be ready for marriage. And how many of us might take our personality and be like, oh, that's my personality, I can't change that, and I'm just going to say, stop fibbing yourself, stop protecting yourself. All this to say we don't want to, again, go the other extreme and say we're responsible for that change. Because then we become self-reliant and think that we don't need God. And think we are in control of everything when God is. And we just surrender to His plan. So St. Paul from the Corinthians says, I planted, Apollo watered, but God gave the growth. So I just want to be sensitive that, these thoughts that we aren't enough, like you are enough, but we still need to change. And sometimes we blame that, like, oh, I have all this wounds and everything like this. And again, I want to be sensitive because some people have been through like really, really tough stuff. For me, it was a lot of paper cuts, like wounds. And others were more like these big wounds. I did have a couple big ones, but anyway. But then if we kind of just do that, then we're not going to grow. And we try to change other people, and we really need to change ourselves. So I wanted to do this little exercise where you take you could write it on your phone, because I didn't bring flashcards and pens, but if you take out your notepad on your phone, or like just a text message, and write down 5 things that you want in a future spouse, or if you're dating or engaged or married, write down 5 things that you want them to change, that you want them to change. So if you're married or engaged, or if you're in the single vocation, 5 things that you want God to do differently. And then I'll give like 1 minute. So now I want you to flip it around, and I want you to write like down below 5 things that you need to grow and heal in, or that you need to change. Because the likelihood is if you're praying for a good man or a good woman, then they're probably praying for a good man, a good woman too. And so you, sometimes we expect all these things of our future spouses, and it's like, well, are we the future spouse for them? Like, are we getting ready for them? Like, we want these perfect people, like the Clark Kent Jesus, but then, here I am doing this and yelling at, someone on the street or something like this, right? So it's like, okay. And I know there's probably a belief too, that you're afraid to marry the wrong person. But the thing is if you're going to the sacraments and you're taking advantage of the sacraments in marriage, the vows are so strong, it's almost impossible to marry the wrong person. You guys are a lot of you're working professionals, you're smart people. Most likely you're going to choose like a good partner. And my brother's wife left because she wasn't going to the sacraments, and she let a lie get in, and she just fed that lie, kept feeding it, and then her emotions got so whatever, that she felt like she had to leave, you know? And so, so if we're in the sacraments, we don't need to be afraid of marriage. Like, I was so afraid of marriage. And it's so fun, guys. If you know the skills, because otherwise, like, thoughts still come up. Like, I would be freaking out. Like, you know, certain thoughts came about, like, before this talk, and if I didn't have these skills, I would be freaking. So I'm so happy that I reasoned through these fears and actually chose Tanto from a place of freedom and not this magnetic force that was pulling us together. Knowing that there still was some risk, like there's gonna be risk, right? Because we can't know what the other person is always gonna do. And yeah, but marriage, the beauty of marriage is that it does take courage. Just like any vocation. Like even nuns, they fantasize, like they might, not fantasize, but like imagine the like nun life is like this sisterhood and we all get along and then you hear nuns and like there's rats running around and they have no food and they have to eat ham every day of the week, you know, until like someone else donates like ground beef, you know, and then people are fighting in the convent. So it's like bad things are gonna happen, like hard things are gonna happen whatever you choose. That doesn't mean it's the wrong decision necessarily, okay? Because I would do that, like I would choose something and then something bad would happen and I would think, oh, I chose the wrong thing. And again, not even with the marriage stuff, with other stuff. So if we keep choosing God every day, in marriage and in life, like marriage is not for the faint of heart. We gotta keep choosing Him, and it is easy to get off the line, in the love line. It is easy, you know, and we need to assume that for me, my husband, wants the best for me, and assume the best of him. Like, don't assume things, right? That's where the enemy can get in there. Like, just don't assume, like, oh, he's working late that night, you know? Okay, he had a lot of clients. Like, don't assume, like, oh, he's probably out with the secretary, you know? And if that thought does come up, ask God, why am I having this thought? Why? And use the voices thing and the breathing to say, why am I having this thought? And maybe there's a wound there where your dad left suddenly, right? Like, you know, for your mom, and maybe, you know, you have that wound. So, and maybe you need more healing in that. Maybe there's a time for like all these different modalities of therapy and coaching and parts work. So John Paul II, he wrote the Jeweler Shop play, and yeah, he just says, you know, we gotta get back on the line of love. And if you haven't read that play, it's really good because it does talk a lot about this relationship anxiety. It really talks into, you know, goes into that whole thing where, you know, on the street and you want the attention, you know, not so great. Like, there was one time I think me and Tyler just became boyfriend, girlfriend, and I saw someone on the street and we locked eyes and I was like, does that mean I should break up with Tato? And it's like, I don't know if that guy is married, he's a priest, he is leaving the country tomorrow, like, maybe he's an ex-murderer, like, you know what I mean? And I'm like thinking, I'm gonna break up with Tato because I randomly saw this guy on the street, you know, like, so just like, don't get crazy, but don't like beat yourself up over the thoughts. Like, just use them as information. The same with the emotions, like, it's just a thought. It's just an emotion. How can I use this? Where is God calling me to heal? Samuel group is so great, but sometimes like the stuff we learn in Samuel group and dating, just toss it out the window. Like the rules of discernment. Bring that into dating, like the rules of discernment. Like the consolation, desolation. Don't make any big moves when you're in desolation. Oh, I'm feeling depressed and, you know, awful, and then you break up with the person. Like, that's not the time to break up. You know, you're in a depression right now. I remember my coach said, you have free will. Whatever you decide, God will bless it. But either decision can be hard. And it's like this, you know, walking in life with God. God presented me, I was walking in life, and I did have some healing. That's another line of the enemy, that I need to be totally healed to get married, right? If you're on your healing journey, maybe there's sometimes where you do need that, like I had that year where I thought I was going to be single, right? But if you're on that healing journey and someone's in your periphery, maybe God wants to heal through them. Because we do hear in relationship, like all that stuff and crap that came up was when I was dating Tonto, and it needed to be healed. And even like yesterday or the other day, I'm like, yeah, Tonto, like, I don't know who I am anymore. Should I be goth tomorrow? And he's like, you can if you want to, like, or like, oh, I think I'm an introvert now. And like, I'm constantly going through these crazy things. Thank God Tonto was so like steady. Like imagine if I married someone else like me. Like that would seem like, but again, even if I did and it's marriage, the bonds are so beautiful and blessed by God. So don't be afraid as well for that if that happens as well. So that's just who God needed, who we needed for each other was our different personalities. But some people have the same temperaments. So that being said, so God presented me the gift of Tonto. And he's like, okay, just choose. And sometimes we're too self-reliant and God will take things away. And he's like, okay, you need more time. And we have to be okay with this too. I remember saying to my spiritual director, and we had been dating, I forget how long, but I was like, if Tom doesn't engage in 6 months, like that's it, like I'm done. And she was like, well, you were just telling me like a second ago, like it took you this long to meet Tonto, and then by the time you like really get to know him, like, so then like, that's gonna be like another 2 years. So like, what's wrong with waiting like a couple more months after, like, what's wrong with it being like a year from now? You know what I mean? Like, and we really needed that because otherwise I would have been going through this stuff in marriage. And for me, some people do go through this stuff in marriage. That's how I found my coach. But for me, I'm really glad that I didn't go through this in marriage. So many decisions I was gung-ho about and God just ended it. So, even getting fired at times from different jobs or because I was just, so let me go get this. So God is really in control, but it's how we respond to what he's giving us. And are we fighting him? Are we fighting him? At one point too, I was like so afraid of myself because I knew with my sins, I was so afraid also of myself to get married. Like in the jeweler shop, there's one of the characters that she says that line. I was like, that was me. And she was afraid of herself in that to get married because of her wounds. She was afraid she was going to do something stupid in the fight or flight. So choosing to marry Tonto was the hardest decision to sort through, but it was the best decision of my life. So now I'll go into like some more kind of myths about dating and marriage, and then some advice at this time. Stop. Okay, so I'm gonna stop. So maybe if anyone has questions. Does anyone have any?
Maybe like 5 minutes for questions before Father goes to the lights on.
I do have something that I could say if no one does about friends, about the best friend thing. There's this belief that I have to marry my best friend, but it's like Tonto and I met in 2020. So in my head, best friend means like from kindergarten, right? And I remember seeing something on like, if you don't marry your best friend, you will never be happy. It's like, that's not true. But then the other extreme where the other side of it is, I can't date a friend who's a guy, from like a woman who's a guy. And so that's also a misconception, like I'll ruin the connection, right? Like, why not? Why not? So, that's what I would say about that. Like for the girls, and this will simplify too for the guys, like, be more intentional with who you're spending your time with, and be different with how you act with male friends versus like guys that you're like kind of interested in, right? Like if you're acting the same with all the guys, like they're not gonna have any idea who really to ask out. And then one thing else that Mother Claire said, she said singlehood, perpetual discernment, and she said perpetual singlehood is not a vocation. So basically, like, we need to decide and be like decisive with what she means by that is she's like, if you're a consecrated person, like you made a decision to do that, right? Versus just, I'm discerning. But then you're just going to all these parties, co-ed parties. It's like, if you were discerning, you would be going on come and see retreats, you would be going to the monastery, the seminary, you know, so if you're discerning, discern. Don't just say I'm discerning and be in this indecision limbo, and be going to all this like co-ed stuff and do this one-on-one thing with the opposite sex and lead people on, and it just becomes too confusing. You know, it's too confusing. Just simplify it. Like, act different with who you act with, those that you like versus those you don't like. Don't have sleepovers. Like, you know, all these things, like, kind of simplify it, and it makes it more fun later as well. Like, you feel like you're kind of back in like the 1940s, you know? And anyways, it makes it fun. So anybody have any questions?
Oh, one question, yes. I relate to a lot of your story, like just being a people person, kind of, but I rarely feel romantically attracted to like the guy friends, but then, you know, it causes confusion on the reverse end. And I, like, often a key, like, oh, I'm interested now, it's because I'm actually interested. Like, I'm actually excited about this person. I want to initiate spending time with you, but I often don't experience that. And I wondered, like, how much that should be weighed into accepting a date. Like, I feel excited about getting to know this person more versus, like, oh, yeah, my friend that I see now and then. Sure, why not go on a date? Because I usually don't do that, because I feel like it would lead somewhere on.
Don't be afraid. I know my brother told me, he said, don't be afraid about saying yes on a date. Like, guys in the city, like, they have a job, they're making money, they would love to take you on a date. So, like, don't feel guilty. Obviously, don't lead them on, you know, like, don't, like, I would say, like, give yourself, like, a month, like, but you're not gonna know, like, that's what I would always be freaking out about. Like, I thought I was supposed to know so much earlier than I did. I told Tanto in July, and we were getting married in October. In July, we went on an engaged encounter retreat. And at that point, I could give him my full yes. I was engaged in December, like 10 months before. So I think for girls it's different. Like, we warm up a little bit slower. Like, we need to get to know the guy a little more. And it could be the same for guys too, but it's like all these questions that we're asking on the first date, like, really should be questions that we're asking like 3-4 months in or something like that. So, like, if there's someone in your periphery and some guy asks you out and you guys kind of got to know each other at a couple of events, like, go bowling with them, go volunteer together, like, see how people show up in different circumstances. Because, like, I find, like, at the Catholic events sometimes, like, at the social, right, like, the same conversation evokes. And if that is happening, like, and you do go to the socials, like, okay, what's a deeper question I can ask someone? But just also be protective of your heart. Like, don't share too much emotionally with someone that it's not intentional, right? Like, don't share so much yet before you go on a date with someone. That's how I think you can kind of simplify it, because then, and like, you do need to show the guy that you're open. So it's kind of, it can be tricky, but yeah, you do need to show that you're open. But yeah, you don't need to know if you need to marry the guy on the first date. And you don't need to think you're leading them on the first date, you know? So it takes time to get to know someone. And so, like, once you're getting to know them, and I think the attraction, like, you can turn off the attraction because of fear. So that's another, like, yeah, so you could just be saying, it's kind of an excuse, I think, because you're afraid to take it further, you know, to accept it. You're afraid you have this friendship, it's so nice, you emotionally connect, or whatever, maybe you don't emotionally connect, you like them, you know, that you just find them interesting, whatever, and it's like, you're just afraid to take it further. I think it's based in fear a lot of times. So go on the date. If it ends up being awful, or you go out on 5 dates and then you end it, like, you probably learned so much. I started writing a list on each date, like date number 1, the name's the guy's name, and then I would say, like, what did I like about the date? Instead of saying, like, what I didn't like. And then, if he texted right away, I knew he liked me. But if he didn't, I knew he didn't. And just for closure for myself, I would just text the next day, thank you so much for the date. You know, I don't know if all guys do that, but that's how it was for me. I know a friend who she was a little more shy. The guy was more shy, so she would text like right away, thank you for the date. And then after the 3rd date, she didn't text, and she's like, what do I do? I was like, well, you show them the pattern that you text every time, so now you're gonna text them. And then he texted back right away. So the other thing my dad said is, don't do this emotional texting stuff or emotional online stuff. Like, the point of online is to get to meet in person. So use it as like, oh, that's the first, that's the hello at the bar or something, or that's the hello at the social. And then you go out on a date, right? Or for the texting, until you're officially boyfriend and girlfriend, just use it as logistics. Oh, okay, meeting here, I'm gonna pick you up, like, what time do you want me to call you? You know, whatever it is. Like, don't use it as these, because you build up this emotional intimacy sometimes too quickly. And a priest even said for spiritual stuff too, like, kind of like wait on that too. Like, let it go slowly. So like, it's okay, like, time is so interesting. Like, you can take time, and like, you can go on a date and like, you know, not go on another date, but you could go on a date and go on like 5 more dates, or, you know, so it's yeah. And what I said to Tonto, like, I said, I want to keep dating you, but I'm just not sure yet. And he was okay with that, so, and he knew that I wasn't leading him on, you know, like, so, I think he probably was like, not totally sure, but yeah, I think as long as we're open with that, and just don't be afraid to take a risk. And yeah, don't be afraid to go out with that friend if they ask you out, and see if there's a room there. Like, why won't I say yes to this guy? You know, like, kind of do the voices thing. Like, why won't I say yes to this guy? And see what comes up. Maybe there is some hope. You know, because I was expecting a guy to have, I don't know, to be whatever you expected him to be, right? And so maybe that comes up. Or maybe it's, yeah, I just really need to heal. I do really need to take time right now. And so I think if you're praying, and then if you need more resources, let me know. I'll let Clarissa know. And yeah, if I had had this when I was dating, it would be a lot more, like, kind of, and we still had like a lot of fun, but it would just be like more like this, and less of like this kind of thing. So, and also, sorry to keep going on again, but the thing about when I was in my 20s, right, because I heard someone say this once, we have different things in our 20s versus like when you're older. Those same things might not be pertinent. Like, oh, I can't date a girl that's older if you're a guy, or I can't date a girl that, you know, makes more than me, or whatever it is. Like, it doesn't really matter anymore. You know what I mean? Like, when you're in your 20s, like, I feel like it's a little different. Okay, yeah, I'm 22, I want to date a guy that's older. Like, okay, yeah, like, but even then, you know, I know a lot of people that they married younger, and sometimes we can ask ourselves, what are we making that thought mean? Like, I was making the doubting isn't good means so much more than it really meant. Like, Jesus and Mary doubted, you know, like, Joseph was like, I'm gonna divorce her quietly, like, this is not, he doubted, right? So, it's normal. So if we stop putting these rigid boundaries on what dating should look like, on what it's supposed to be, on what we expect it to be, what we expect it not to be, and we just throw them all out the window, I'm saying. And really just be praying and listening for the voices of God and the lies of the enemy and why I'm making certain decisions. is this based on a lie or a wound? And you'll start to realize, the more you start like becoming aware, you'll be like, oh yeah, like I'm doing that thing again, you know. So I don't know if that answered your question.